I saw something so bizarre and disturbing, something I can't stop thinking about. A mythical creature that should not exist. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. Every time I fly my helicopter, I remember. And every time I think about it, I hate myself a little more for what I didn't do. I'm a helicopter pilot for a logging company in northern Washington state. I've flown over these forests for 12 years. 12 years of watching the seasons change from above. 12 years of navigating through fog and rain and snow. 12 years of thinking I knew these mountains. I thought I'd seen everything these forests had to offer. The beauty, the danger, the wildlife. I was wrong. I was so wrong. On October 3rd, 2023, I was flying my regular supply run to one of our remote camps. It was just another Tuesday morning. Or at least that's what I thought when I woke up that day. The sky was clear blue without a single cloud. The kind of morning that makes you feel grateful to be alive. The winds were calm, perfect flying conditions, the kind of day pilots dream about. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have this job, to get paid to fly over some of the most beautiful wilderness in America. I was cruising at about 800 feet, following my usual route. The helicopter was running perfectly. Everything felt routine, normal, safe. Then I spotted something moving through a clearing below. Just a flash of movement that caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a hiker or maybe a lost hunter. People do get turned around in these mountains sometimes. It happens more often than you'd think. The wilderness up here is unforgiving, easy to get lost if you don't know what you're doing. But when I zoomed in with my camera, everything changed. My whole world shifted in that moment. I realized it wasn't a person at all, at least not a normal person. It was something I'd only heard about in stories, something I'd always assumed was just a myth. A legend, a campfire tale people told to scare each other. But there it was, real as anything I'd ever seen, walking through that clearing in broad daylight. It was a Bigfoot, a massive 8-foot-tall Bigfoot covered in dark fur, maybe even taller than 8 feet. It was hard to judge from that height, but it was enormous. Bigger than any human, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. And it was carrying a human body draped over its shoulder like a sack of grain, like the person weighed nothing. The body was completely limp, hanging there lifeless. The person wasn't moving at all. No struggling, no signs of life. Just dead weight being carried through the wilderness. The red jacket they were wearing stood out against the dark fur of the Bigfoot. Bright red, impossible to miss, like a warning flag. Like a beacon of tragedy, I watched through my camera as this creature walked calmly across the clearing, heading for the tree line on the far side. Not hurrying, not worried about being seen. Just walking with this steady, purposeful gait, like it had done this before, like it knew exactly where it was going and what it was doing. That image is burned into my brain forever. I see it when I'm awake. I see it in my dreams. The massive creature, the limp body, the red jacket. All of it plays on repeat in my mind like a horror movie that never ends. But what haunts me more than seeing it is what I didn't do afterwards. The choices I made. The fear that controlled me. The cowardice that let someone's child stay lost forever. This isn't a story about proving Bigfoot exists. I don't care if you believe me about that part or not. This is a story about my failure to recover that body, about my cowardice in the face of something terrifying, about a family that still doesn't have answers because I was too afraid to act when it mattered most, because I put my own safety above doing what was right, because I failed when someone needed me to be brave. Let me back up and explain my job. I fly supplies from our main depot to 3 different logging camps scattered across the Cascade Mountains. The route takes me over some of the most remote wilderness in Washington state. We're talking millions of acres of dense forest where you could walk for days without seeing another person. The whole flight usually takes about 2 hours round trip. I make this run twice a week, always on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I fly a Bell 206 helicopter. It's reliable, easy to handle, and equipped with a mounted camera that we use to spot hazards or check on remote sites. That camera is what captured everything that day. By October of 2023, I'd made this exact flight probably 600 times. I knew every ridge, every valley, every logging road below. The landscape was familiar to me. Endless green forest broken up by the occasional dirt road or stream cutting through the valleys. In all those flights, I'd seen plenty of wildlife bears, elk, mountain lions, but nothing prepared me for what I saw that day. The 3 camps I service are staffed by rotating crews of loggers, tough guys who work with chainsaws and heavy equipment all day, not the kind of people who scare easily. Camp 1 and Camp 2 were the easy stops, close to civilization, easy terrain. But Camp 3 was different. It sat in a valley between 2 ridgelines, about as isolated as you could get miles from the nearest road. Miles from help if something went wrong. Over the past few months leading up to October, the crew there had been reporting strange incidents. Tools going missing overnight. Big tools, chainsaws, axes, heavy equipment that you couldn't just lose by accident. Equipment moved during the night when everyone was asleep, arranged in strange patterns. Weird sounds echoing through the forest after dark, sounds that didn't match any animal they knew. Deep howls, wood knocking, footsteps around the perimeter of the camp. Most of the loggers tried to blame it on bears getting bold before winter. Black bears and grizzlies both roam these mountains, and they're known to get into camps looking for food. That's the logical explanation, the safe explanation, the one that lets you sleep at night. But the incidents didn't really fit bear behavior. Bears don't move equipment, bears don't arrange things, bears don't make those kinds of sounds. One of the older loggers, a guy who'd been working these forests for 30 years, quit suddenly the week before my sighting. Just packed up his stuff and left without even collecting his final paycheck. I remember him saying he wasn't going back there. He had this look in his eyes, not anger, not frustration, fear, real fear. When someone asked him why, he wouldn't explain. Just shook his head and left. At the time, I thought he was just being dramatic, maybe having some kind of breakdown. Now I wonder what he saw, what he experienced that made a 30-year veteran of these mountains walk away from his livelihood. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I loaded up the supplies at the depot around 8 a.m. Food, fuel, equipment parts, standard stuff. The weather forecast was perfect, not a cloud in the sky. The kind of day that makes you glad you chose to be a pilot. I took off around 8:30 and headed toward Camp 1. The first 2 stops went smoothly. Dropped off supplies, chatted with the crews for a few minutes, then back in the air. By 10:30, I was leaving Camp 2 and heading northwest toward Camp 3. That's when things changed. The leg between Camp 2 and Camp 3 always felt more isolated than the rest of the route. The logging roads disappear. It's just unbroken forest for miles in every direction. Camp 3 sits at the far end of this wilderness, tucked into a valley that feels like it's at the edge of the world. I was about 10 minutes out, cruising at 1,200 feet, when something caught my eye. There was a clearing below that I'd flown over hundreds of times before. I'd never paid much attention to it, just another gap in the trees. But this time, something was moving through it. At first glance, I thought it might be an elk. We see them all the time. Big animals that look even bigger from the air. But as I watched, I realized whatever was down there was walking on 2 legs. I slowed the helicopter and dropped altitude to get a better look. Down to about 800 feet, The clearing was maybe 200 yards across, bordered on all sides by dense pine forest. And walking right through the middle of it was something big, really big. My first rational thought was that it had to be a person, maybe a hiker who'd gotten lost and was trying to find their way out. But something about the way it moved seemed wrong. The stride was too long. Each step covered way more ground than a human should be able to manage. And the posture was off, hunched forward slightly, like someone carrying something heavy. I grabbed the camera control and zoomed in. What I saw on the screen made my stomach drop. Through the camera, I could see it clearly, a massive figure easily 8 or 9 feet tall, maybe taller. It was covered completely in dark brown fur, almost black in the shadows cast by the surrounding trees. The Bigfoot was walking upright, but with that forward lean I'd noticed before. Its arms hung down past where human arms should end, way past almost to its knees. The shoulders were broad and heavily muscled. You could see the power in them even from 800 feet away. The head seemed to sit directly on those shoulders with almost no neck to speak of. It looked exactly like the descriptions I'd heard in Bigfoot stories over the years, but seeing it in person, in real life, was completely different from hearing about it. Then I noticed what the Bigfoot was carrying. Draped over its right shoulder was what looked unmistakably like a human body. The body was completely limp, arms dangling down the Bigfoot's back. I could make out clothing clearly, a bright red jacket, blue jeans, the kind of outfit you'd wear hiking in the mountains. The person wasn't moving at all, not struggling, not shifting position, just hanging there like dead weight. The Bigfoot walked with purpose. It wasn't hurrying, but it moved steadily toward the tree line on the far side of the clearing. Each step was deliberate and sure. This wasn't some confused animal wandering around. This was something that knew exactly where it was going and what it was doing. I felt frozen in place. My hands were on the controls, but I couldn't seem to process what I was seeing. Couldn't make my brain accept what my eyes were showing me. Part of my brain was screaming that this couldn't be real, that Bigfoot didn't exist, that I must be hallucinating. Maybe I was having some kind of mental breakdown. Maybe the altitude was affecting me. Maybe I'd inhaled some kind of fumes from the helicopter. Anything to explain this away. Another part was trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone in an incredibly realistic costume carrying a mannequin, some kind of movie production or prank. Maybe there was a logical explanation that didn't involve cryptids and monsters, but that didn't make sense either. We were miles from anywhere, miles from the nearest road or town. The terrain below was brutal. Dense undergrowth that would tear you apart, steep ravines that could kill you if you fell. No trails, no infrastructure. Nobody would hike through that wilderness for fun, let alone while wearing a heavy costume and carrying a mannequin. It would be physically impossible. And the way the Bigfoot moved was too natural, too fluid, too effortless. This wasn't someone stumbling around in a suit trying not to trip. This was something built for this environment, something that belonged here more than I did. I realized I needed to get closer, to see better, to make sure my camera was capturing everything. I dropped the helicopter down to 600 feet and moved forward slowly, trying to get ahead of the Bigfoot slightly so I could position for a better angle. I was maybe 400 feet away horizontally now, looking at it from the side. At this range, with the camera zoomed in, the details became crystal clear. The Bigfoot's face was visible in profile. Heavy brow ridge jutting out over deep-set eyes, flat nose. Massive jaw that looked like it could bite through bone. The face looked almost human in some ways, but fundamentally different in others. More primitive, more powerful. The fur was matted and dirty. Bits of leaves and debris were stuck in it. This wasn't some pristine creature from a nature documentary. This was something that lived rough in the wilderness. The fur moved slightly in the breeze as the Bigfoot walked. That detail struck me as important somehow. Proof that this was real, not some trick of the light or my imagination. The Bigfoot's legs were thick and powerful. Each step covered several yards. The muscles rippled under the fur with every movement. This was something built for strength and endurance, something that could travel long distances through difficult terrain without getting tired. The human body it carried was definitely real. I could see the person's hair moving slightly in the breeze. Dark hair, shoulder length. The red jacket had some kind of patch or logo on the back. I couldn't quite make out what it said, but I could see the white stitching clearly. One of the person's arms swung limply with each step the Bigfoot took. The movement was too natural to be a mannequin, too fluid. This was a real person. I couldn't tell if they were dead or unconscious. There was no way to know from 400 feet away. But the complete lack of movement suggested the worst. No struggling, no attempts to escape, just that limp, lifeless swaying with each of the Bigfoot's steps. Then the Bigfoot did something that somehow made everything worse. It reached up with its free hand and adjusted the body on its shoulder. Just a casual movement, like you'd adjust a heavy backpack. That gesture was the most disturbing part. The casualness of it, like this was routine. Like carrying human bodies through the wilderness was something this Bigfoot did regularly, something normal. I kept filming, making sure the camera was recording everything. The Bigfoot was maybe 50 yards from the tree line now. I realized that once it entered the forest, I'd lose sight of it completely. The canopy in this area was too thick to see through from above, just an impenetrable blanket of green. I had maybe 30 seconds before it disappeared. 30 seconds to decide what to do. Just before reaching the trees, the Bigfoot suddenly stopped. It stood completely still for a long moment. At least 10 seconds where nothing moved except its chest rising and falling with breath. Then slowly and deliberately, it turned and looked directly up at the helicopter. Directly at me. I felt my blood run cold when I saw its face head-on through the camera. The eyes were deep set but clearly visible. And they were intelligent. That's the word that came to mind immediately. Intelligent. This wasn't the blank stare of an animal. This wasn't a bear or an elk looking up at a helicopter with simple curiosity or fear. The Bigfoot's eyes looked aware, calculating, like it understood exactly what the helicopter was and what I was doing. We locked eyes through the camera lens. At least it felt like we did. I know that sounds impossible. I was hundreds of feet away inside a helicopter, but I swear it felt like that Bigfoot was looking right at me, right into me. For maybe 10 seconds, neither of us moved. I could see its chest rising and falling with each breath, could see the human body on its shoulder remaining motionless, could feel my own heart pounding in my chest. Then the Bigfoot did something that still gives me nightmares. It reached up with its free hand and deliberately adjusted the body again. But this time it felt different. This time it felt like a message, like it was making sure I saw what it was carrying, making sure I understood. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't the Bigfoot being startled by a helicopter. This was intentional, deliberate. Then it turned back toward the forest and walked into the trees. Within seconds, it had vanished completely. One moment it was there, visible in the clearing. The next moment it was gone, swallowed up by the dense undergrowth and shadows. I circled the area for another few minutes, trying to spot any movement, any sign of where it had gone. But the forest had taken it completely. There was nothing to see but an endless canopy of green. I hovered there for what felt like forever, but was probably only a couple minutes. My hands were shaking on the controls. My mind was racing through what I should do. I was supposed to be at Camp 3 in 5 minutes. They were expecting me. They needed their supplies, but I'd just seen something impossible. Something that might be related to a missing person. Should I land in the clearing and look for tracks? Should I call the authorities immediately? Should I go to Camp 3 and tell the crew what I'd seen? Every option seemed wrong somehow. Landing felt dangerous. What if the Bigfoot was still nearby? What if it came back while I was on the ground? Calling the authorities felt insane. Who would believe me? I decided to continue to Camp 3 first. It was only 3 miles away. The crew needed their supplies, and I needed to find out if anyone from the camp was missing. Maybe the person in the red jacket was someone from Camp 3 who'd gone out for a hike and hadn't come back. I told myself I'd get answers there and then figure out what to do next. The flight to Camp 3 felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my head. The massive figure, the limp body, those intelligent eyes. Had that really just happened, or was I losing my mind? I pinched my arm to make sure I was awake. I was. This was real. This had actually happened. I touched down at Camp 3 at 10:47 a.m. I remember checking the time. The crew came out to help unload like always. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. I felt like I should be screaming about what I'd just seen, but instead I was just unloading boxes of supplies like it was any other Tuesday. I asked the foreman if everyone was accounted for. He did a quick head count. All 12 loggers were present, nobody missing. That should have been a relief, but it just raised more questions. If nobody from Camp 3 was missing, then who was the person in the red jacket? I asked if anyone had seen anything unusual lately. The foreman laughed and said the usual stuff. Tools moving around, weird sounds at night. Then he mentioned something that made my stomach sink. A hiker had passed through 3 days ago, young person, early 20s, wearing a red jacket. The hiker had stopped to fill water bottles and chat for a few minutes, said they were heading north on the Pacific Crest Trail, then they'd continued on into the backcountry. Red jacket, Pacific Crest Trail, 3 days ago. The timeline fit. The location fit. I felt sick hearing about it. That hiker was probably who I'd just seen being carried by the Bigfoot. Probably already dead by the time I spotted them, or dying, and I'd just flown away to deliver supplies instead of doing something about it. After unloading at Camp 3, I flew back to the main depot. The whole way, I was trying to figure out how to explain what I'd seen. I couldn't just say I saw a Bigfoot carrying a body. Nobody would take that seriously. They'd think I was crazy or lying. I needed to be strategic about this. As soon as I landed, I called the local sheriff's department. I explained that I'd seen a large figure carrying what looked like a human body in a remote wilderness area. I gave them the exact coordinates of the clearing. I intentionally didn't mention Bigfoot at first, just said I saw someone carrying a body. Let them draw their own conclusions from that. The sheriff said they'd send a search and rescue team to check it out. He asked a bunch of questions. How far away was I? How good was my view? Was I sure it was a person being carried? I answered as honestly as I could without sounding insane. Then I called my supervisor at the logging company and showed him the video footage from my camera. His reaction was just silence for a long time. Then he said quietly, "What the hell is that?" He watched the footage 3 more times, then he agreed I needed to report it, but warned me about mentioning Bigfoot. He said to stick to saying I saw a large person, leave it vague, don't give them a reason to dismiss the report as a prank or hallucination. I understood what he meant. Over the next few hours, word spread around the depot. Other pilots came to look at the footage. Everyone had the same reaction: shock, disbelief. Nobody could explain what they were seeing. Some tried to say it was a bear standing upright, but bears don't carry things over their shoulder. Bears don't walk like that. This was something else. The search and rescue team launched that afternoon. I gave them the exact coordinates and offered to fly them in. They took me up on it. We flew back to the clearing. I pointed out exactly where I'd seen the Bigfoot disappear into the trees. The team spent 2 full days searching the area. They found the clearing easily enough. Found tracks too, enormous footprints pressed deep into the soft earth, at least 18 inches long, way bigger than any human. But they never found the Bigfoot, never found the human body. The tracks led into the forest and then just disappeared at a creek, like the Bigfoot knew how to hide its trail. The search team came back empty-handed. They filed a report about the tracks but couldn't explain them. And without a body, without any other evidence, there wasn't much else they could do. 5 days after the sighting, I couldn't take it anymore. I kept thinking about that person in the red jacket, someone's child, maybe someone's parent or sibling just gone, carried off into the wilderness by something that shouldn't exist. And nobody was doing anything about it. The official search had been called off. Life was moving on. But that person was still out there somewhere. I convinced 2 other pilots from the company to go back with me. We wanted to do our own ground search. Maybe we could find something the official search team had missed. We drove as close as we could get in a 4-wheel drive truck, then hiked in the rest of the way. It took us 4 hours of brutal hiking to reach the clearing. The terrain was even worse on foot than it looked from the air. When we arrived, we found the tracks immediately. They were still there, pressed deep into the soft earth around the clearing. Massive footprints that made my size 11 boots look like a child's shoe. Each print was easily 18 inches long and 7 inches wide. The stride length was over 6 feet. Nothing human could make tracks like that. Nothing. We followed the tracks from the middle of the clearing toward the tree line, right where I'd seen the Bigfoot disappear. The tracks were clear and easy to follow for the first 50 yards, but then they got harder to see as the ground got rockier. At the forest edge, we found something that made us stop in our tracks, literally. There was a piece of red fabric caught on a low branch, torn from a jacket, the same bright red as what I'd seen the Bigfoot carrying. We bagged it carefully with shaking hands. This was evidence, proof that someone in a red jacket had been through here, proof that what I'd seen was real. The fabric was weathered like it had been there for a few days, which matched the timeline. The tracks continued into the forest. We followed them for maybe 200 yards. The undergrowth was thick and the going was slow. Branches caught at our clothes. The terrain was steep and treacherous. Then we reached a small ravine with a creek at the bottom. The tracks went down into the water and completely disappeared on the other side. We searched both banks of that creek for another hour, split up and walked upstream and downstream, covering maybe a quarter mile in each direction. We looked for any sign of where the Bigfoot had come out of the water: broken branches, disturbed earth, wet footprints on rocks, anything at all that would tell us which direction it went. But there was nothing, no tracks, no disturbed earth, no signs whatsoever. It was like the Bigfoot had just vanished into thin air. Or like it understood that water would hide its trail, like it knew we'd be following and took steps to make sure we couldn't. As the sun started getting lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, we made the decision to head back. The hike out would take at least 4 hours, and we didn't want to be caught in these mountains after dark, not after what we'd seen, not in an area where that Bigfoot might still be nearby. We told ourselves we'd come back better equipped, with more people, with camping gear, so we could search for days instead of hours. But deep down, all 3 of us knew the truth. We were terrified. Terrified of what we might find if we kept going. Terrified of what might find us if we stayed too long. A week later, I went to the ranger station to file my own report. I brought the piece of red fabric we'd found. The ranger on duty listened to my whole story without interrupting. When I finished, he got very quiet. Then he got up and went to a back room. When he came back, he was carrying a file folder, a missing person report. The report was from 6 weeks earlier. A hiker had gone missing in this exact area, 23 years old. Last seen at a trail checkpoint about 15 miles south of where I'd spotted the Bigfoot. The description said the hiker was wearing a red North Face jacket. The description matched perfectly. The ranger laid out photos from the file. The jacket in the photos was identical to what I'd filmed. Same color, same style, same white patch on the back. I felt sick looking at those photos. This was a real person, a young person with their whole life ahead of them. Parents who were still looking, still hoping. The ranger said the official search had been called off after 3 weeks. No trace had been found except for a torn backpack near a stream 10 miles from the last checkpoint. They'd assumed the hiker had gotten lost or injured. Wild animal attack, maybe. The usual explanations for people who disappear in the wilderness. I asked if I could contact the family directly. The ranger said no, that wasn't how it worked, but he would pass along what we'd found. He took the fabric sample and added it to the file. Said he'd send it for testing to confirm it came from the missing hiker's jacket. Then he looked at me with this expression I'll never forget. Tired. Sad, like he'd seen this before. He said I was the 4th person to report seeing something like this in the area over the past 10 years. 4 people. 4 reports of large figures carrying or dragging what looked like human bodies. And every single time, there had been someone missing shortly before or after the sighting. But they'd never recovered a single body. Not one. The cases all remained unsolved. That information hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't just bad luck or coincidence. This was a pattern. Something in these mountains was taking people, had been taking people for years, and nobody was doing anything about it because nobody wanted to believe what was really happening. Nobody wanted to say the word Bigfoot out loud and sound crazy. 3 weeks after my first sighting, I was flying the route again. I'd been trying to avoid that specific clearing. I'd altered my flight path slightly so I didn't have to look down at that spot. But on this particular day, fog had rolled in over my usual route. I had no choice but to fly lower and more directly over the area where I'd seen the Bigfoot. It was early morning, maybe 7 a.m. The sun was just starting to burn off the mist. I was maybe half a mile from the clearing when I saw movement below. My heart started pounding immediately. I knew before I even looked closely what I was going to see. I slowed the helicopter and dropped to altitude. Through breaks in the fog, I could see the same clearing, and in that clearing was the Bigfoot. The same massive figure, same dark fur, same impossible size, but this time it wasn't carrying anything. This time it was digging. Using its massive hands to move earth and rocks near the base of a large fallen tree at the edge of the clearing, I circled slowly, trying to keep the helicopter as quiet as possible even though I knew it was loud. The Bigfoot kept digging. It didn't run, didn't hide, it just kept working. Like my presence didn't matter. Maybe it knew I wouldn't land. Maybe it knew I was too afraid. I watched for maybe 5 minutes. The Bigfoot dug out a space about 6 feet long and 3 feet deep, exactly the right size for a human body. Then it stopped and looked up directly at me. Same intelligent gaze as before, same awareness. It stood there with its hands covered in dirt, just watching my helicopter, watching me. I felt completely paralyzed. This was my chance. This was my opportunity to mark the exact location, to call for help immediately, to bring people back while I still knew precisely where to look. to maybe finally recover that hiker's body and give their family closure. But instead, all I felt was overwhelming fear washing over me in waves that Bigfoot could have run, could have hidden in the trees like it did the first time, but it chose to stay visible, chose to let me watch, almost like it was daring me to do something about it. I took coordinates on my GPS, made sure they were marked clearly. Then I increased altitude and continued to Camp 3. The whole way there, my hands were shaking so badly on the controls that I could barely fly straight. This was it. This was the moment where I could make a difference, where I could help that missing hiker's family. But I was terrified, absolutely terrified of what might happen if I went back there on the ground. I landed at Camp 3 and unloaded supplies like a robot. My mind was racing with what I should do. I had the exact coordinates of what was almost certainly a grave site. I had a second sighting of the Bigfoot. I should call the sheriff immediately, should organize a search party to go back there today, should act while I still knew exactly where to look. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I flew back to the depot, I landed, I filled out my routine flight logs like it was just another normal day. I said nothing to anyone about what I'd seen. Not a word. I told myself I needed time to think, needed to figure out the right way to report it, needed to process what I'd witnessed. But those were all lies. The truth was simpler and more shameful. I was terrified. The way that Bigfoot had looked at me, the deliberate nature of what it was doing, the fact that it clearly wasn't afraid of me or my helicopter. I realized that if I went back there on the ground, if I brought people to dig up that site, we might not all make it out. That Bigfoot was smart, it was strong, and it had been taking people in these mountains for years without getting caught. What made me think we'd be any different? That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept seeing the photos of that missing hiker, kept thinking about parents who didn't know where their child was, who might never get to bury their child properly, who would spend the rest of their lives wondering what happened. And it was my fault. I could change that. I had the coordinates, I had the information, but I was too afraid to act on it. The next morning, I finally called the ranger station. I gave them the coordinates of the digging site, explained what I'd seen. The ranger said they'd send a team out to investigate, but it would take a few days to organize. The weather was turning bad. Early snow was forecast for the mountains. Maybe they could get there in a week. A week? I said that might be too late. The ranger asked what I meant. I couldn't explain the urgency I felt, couldn't put into words why I knew we needed to go. Immediately, I just said it was important to check the site as soon as possible. He said they'd do their best, but they had protocols to follow, safety measures to take. They couldn't just rush into the backcountry without proper planning. I understood, but I also knew every day we waited was another day for that Bigfoot to move the body or hide the evidence. 4 days later, the ranger team went out to the coordinates I'd given them. I wasn't with them. I had to fly my regular route that day. But I got the report that evening they'd found the clearing. They'd found the fallen tree. But the digging site was gone, completely gone. The earth had been smoothed over, covered with leaves and forest debris, like nothing had ever been disturbed there. They'd brought ground-penetrating radar equipment with them, professional-grade equipment that could detect disturbances in soil up to 10 feet deep. They scanned the entire area around that fallen tree methodically, grid by grid, looking for any anomaly, any sign of buried remains, any indication that something had been buried there recently. Found nothing, absolutely nothing, no disturbed earth beneath the surface, no buried remains, no evidence that anyone had ever been there. The earth looked completely undisturbed as far as the radar could detect. The team had expanded their search to cover a half-mile radius around the site. They'd spent 2 full days out there searching. They found more of the massive footprints scattered throughout the area tracks, leading in multiple directions through the forest. Evidence that the Bigfoot had been moving through that entire region. But the tracks would go 100 yards and then vanish, just disappear completely. Like the Bigfoot knew exactly how to hide its trail, like it understood that people would follow and took deliberate steps to prevent it. One ranger reported finding a small cave about a quarter mile from the clearing. Inside were signs that something large had been using it. The earth was packed down like something had been sleeping there. Broken branches were arranged almost like bedding. But there were no remains, no evidence of the missing hiker, no evidence of anything that would help the investigation. When I heard the report that evening, I felt crushing guilt like I'd never experienced before. It hit me like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Hard to think I'd waited too long. I'd let fear control my decisions. The Bigfoot had known I was watching that morning, had known I'd report what I saw eventually, and it had used those 4 days wisely. 4 days to move the body, or hide it better, or do whatever it needed to do to make sure we'd never find it. 4 days because I'd been too afraid to act immediately. 4 days that I could never get back. 4 days that might have made all the difference. The ranger who'd shown me the missing person file called me directly that night. He said they'd done what they could, said the hiker's family had been notified about the new search. But without remains, without definitive proof, the case would stay open, unsolved. The ranger's voice was kind, but there was something else in it. Disappointment, maybe, or accusation. He didn't say it directly, but we both knew. If I had acted immediately, if I had landed that day, or led a team back within hours instead of days, we might have recovered the body. We might have given the family closure. Instead, I'd let fear control me. And now that young hiker was still out there somewhere, carried off by the Bigfoot to some place we'd never find. Over the next 2 months, I flew that route, constantly watching for any sign. Every single flight, I'd slow down over the area. Search for any indication of the Bigfoot or disturbed earth, any clue that might lead us to the hiker's body. But I saw nothing. The clearing looked peaceful and empty every time I flew over it, like nothing had ever happened there. I organized 3 more ground searches on my days off. I brought other pilots, I brought friends who hunted in these mountains, people who knew the terrain. We covered miles of forest on foot. It was exhausting, dangerous work. The terrain was brutal, but we kept searching. We found more of the massive footprints on several occasions, found trees with bark stripped off high up, 10 or 11 feet off the ground. Found areas where the undergrowth was trampled in ways that didn't make sense for any normal animal. But we never found another grave site, never found any trace of the missing hiker. It was like the forest had swallowed them completely. On one search, we found something that made my blood run cold. A small clearing maybe 2 miles from where I'd first seen the Bigfoot. In the center of the clearing was a pile of rocks, stacked carefully, deliberately, not natural. Around the rock pile were more of the massive footprints. It looked almost like a marker or a warning. We approached it carefully, half expecting to find remains beneath the rocks. But when we moved them aside, there was nothing underneath, just more rocks and earth. It felt like the Bigfoot was playing with us, leaving signs it knew we'd find, but never giving us what we were actually looking for, never giving us closure. We reported each finding to the rangers, but without actual remains or concrete evidence of what happened to the hiker, there was nothing official that could be done. The case remained unsolved. The family continued to wait for answers that never came. And I continued to feel the weight of my failure every single day. I still fly the route twice a week, still slow down over that original clearing every single time. The guilt never goes away. It's there when I wake up. It's there when I go to sleep. I replay that second sighting constantly in my mind. The Bigfoot digging while I watch from the safety of my helicopter. I should have landed right then and there. Should have at least gotten lower, taken better GPS readings, stayed there watching until I could guide a team to that exact spot. Instead, I let fear make my decision for me. And someone's child remained missing because of it. I've looked at the missing person page online dozens of times, read the desperate pleas from the parents, looked at the photos they posted, seen the age progression pictures showing what their child would look like now. Knowing those pictures are pointless, knowing they'll never see their child again. I've thought about contacting the family directly, telling them what I saw, but what would I say? I saw a Bigfoot carrying your child through the wilderness, and then I saw where it might have buried them, but I was too afraid to act immediately, so now we'll never know for sure. The truth would destroy them, or they'd think I was insane. Either way, it wouldn't bring their child home, it wouldn't give them closure. I've talked to counselors about the guilt, tried to work through it, but nothing helps because the guilt is justified. I made a choice that day. I chose my own safety over finding the truth, over recovering a body, over giving a family peace. That was my choice, and I have to live with it. Camp 3 was shut down permanently a few months ago. Too many incidents, too many frightened workers. Nobody wanted to work there anymore. Part of me wonders if I should have pushed harder to keep it open. More people in the area might have meant more eyes watching, more chances to spot the Bigfoot, more opportunities to find where it takes people. But another part of me is relieved it's closed. Relieved that no more workers have to risk whatever is out there in those mountains. I've considered quitting my job, moving away from these mountains entirely. But that feels like running away, like abandoning that missing hiker a second time. So I keep flying, keep watching, keep hoping for another chance that I know probably won't come. The Bigfoot is smart, smarter than I ever imagined. It's learned to avoid me now, learned to stay hidden when my helicopter is near, or maybe it moved to a different territory entirely. Maybe it sensed too much attention and relocated to somewhere more remote. I'll never know. It's been 14 months since the first sighting. The missing hiker's case is still technically open, but no longer active. The family still updates the missing person page regularly, still posts pleas for information, still holds out hope that maybe their child is alive somewhere. Lost, but alive. I know better. I saw what I saw. That person wasn't moving, wasn't alive. They were taken by something that shouldn't exist. I fly over that clearing twice a week. Have flown over it probably 120 times since October 3rd, 2023. I've never seen the Bigfoot again, not once. Sometimes I wonder if it moved on to different territory, if it sensed too much attention in that area and relocated somewhere more remote. Other times I think it's still there, still watching from the trees when I fly over, just choosing to stay hidden now, choosing to avoid being seen. I keep the original video on a secure hard drive. I've watched it hundreds of times. Every detail is burned into my memory. The way the Bigfoot walked with that long, powerful stride. How it carried the body so casually over its shoulder. That moment when it stopped and looked up at me. Those intelligent eyes, that deliberate adjustment of the body to make sure I saw all of it. I know I should have done more, should have been braver, should have cared more about finding that hiker than about my own fear and safety. The piece of red fabric we found is still with the Rangers. DNA testing eventually confirmed it came from the missing hiker's jacket, but without a body, it's just another piece of evidence that leads nowhere. The family was told about the fabric. We're told it means their child was probably in that area. But probable location doesn't bring someone home. I lie awake most nights thinking about what might have been, if I'd acted faster after the first sighting, if I'd landed immediately during the second sighting, if I'd been braver, more persistent, more willing to risk my own safety. Maybe that hiker's parents would have their child back. Maybe they could have had a funeral, a grave, a place to mourn properly. Instead, their child is somewhere out there in those millions of acres of forest, taken by something that's smarter than I ever imagined, hidden in some place we'll never find. And it's my fault the family will never know the full truth. They'll never know what really happened, never know that their child was carried off by a Bigfoot, never know that I had 2 chances to help and failed both times. That knowledge is mine to carry, mine to live with. I tell people I'm still looking, still flying that route, still hoping for one more chance, one more sighting that I won't waste. But I know the truth. I had my chances, 2 clear opportunities to make a difference. And I failed. Failed that missing hiker, failed their family, failed myself. The Bigfoot is still out there somewhere in those trees. I know it is. And I'll spend the rest of my life wondering where it took that hiker, wondering if there are others, wondering what I could have found if I'd been brave enough to act when it mattered. The guilt doesn't fade. It doesn't get easier. Every time I fly over that clearing, I see it all again. The massive figure, the red jacket, those eyes looking up at me. And I know I failed when someone needed me most. That's something I'll carry forever. For more interesting stories, check this out.